I think the last session we had went okay, and where we just had an open discussion. I mean, obviously, where we have a very specialized subject that requires, some expert knowledge, and it's better to have an introduction, I guess, by somebody who does have that knowledge. But I think most people comrades here, are following what's going on in America to one degree or another, and have got different takes on it and things aspects that they find more interesting or important. So I think an open discussion is probably the way to go. Is everyone happy with that? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Good. All right. So we've had the elections for the midterms a few weeks ago, and the result was that the Republicans took a majority in the House of Representatives. Not a big majority, but a significant enough majority, enough for them to, I think it's like something like 220 to 213. So they've got enough to establish their majority, and they're preparing to take over in early January the House of Representatives. And the end result of that will mean that in practice, most legislation will not be able to get through. Biden, the Democrats have retained a slim majority, it would appear, depending, I don't know if it depends on the election in 2 weeks' time or next week or whenever it is. I think it's in 2 weeks' time in Georgia for the one Senate seat. But I think whatever happens, the Democrats will still just have a narrow majority in the Senate. So that will allow them to continue appointing people. But it will mean that because you have to have all of these three branches of government, or the three parts of the 2 parts of the Congress and the presidency have to all be in synchronization to be able to get a piece of legislation through. That will mean that Democrats' legislative agenda will not be able to be progressed for the next 2 years. So there'll be what they call a lame duck presidency. Although, of course, they'll probably be able to get some laws through that are where there's a consensus among the Republicans and the Democrats, like on attacking China or things like that. Of course, they'll be able to get those things through. But otherwise, the domestic agenda of the Democrats will be sort of in the freezer, I guess. And so that's going to make life even more difficult for American politics to get things done, and for the Democrats to get their agenda through. And then there'll be then in 2 years' time there'll be elections for the Congress again, and there'll be elections for the presidency. So these are the kind of things that are going ahead. All right, so that's just my few words just to introduce the thing. Fire away. Who would like to come in and say what they think about what their perspectives are for America in the short, medium, longer term? Don't hesitate. Roy, did you want to say something?
I'll just say a couple of things. Because we've reached a kind of, I don't know what you call it, a turning point or a crossroads in history where the American dominance of the world economy and its superiority and its military power and all the rest of it is deemed to be coming to an end. The end of a period where they were able, because of the being an advanced industrial nation, was able to take over from, British imperialism and French and European, or different imperialist countries, on the back of the West, the Europe's involvement in the First and Second World Wars and the weakness that they were in, and were able to stamp their authority over the world's financial system, the dollar being the world currency, the IMF, World Bank, and all the rest of it, and prevent self-determination of the rest of the countries around the world through all those measures that they could use, including sanctions. And I think that is, whatever we say, what about the internal debate within in the United States, and it's got an enormous amount of reserve wealth and capacity, but it has, like the rest of the West, suffered from supporting the fire sector, as Michael Hudson calls it, the finance, insurance and real estate sector. All this stuff that don't represent anything materially, even though they call themselves financial products that they sell, as if it's something you could grab hold of. It's just an opportunity for someone to make interest and money out of nothing. And that aspect of it, and of course the other side of the coin is the deindustrialization that has occurred. And the acceleration of that deindustrialization by the West using cheap labour abroad. You know, the United States has used Russia, China, Mexico, Canada, whatever, and the rest of the West, you know, have got large factories in China and in Indonesia and all these other places, and so we're in a position where we don't make anything, not like America, which is fairly self-sufficient, you know, and that's its advantage. The rest of us, we don't make anything, we don't grow anything, you know, we're in a shit, and so I think that what's going to affect the United States is this undeclared war that is now started. It's been going for a while, between the United States, Russia, China, and all the rest of the developed world who want they don't want a unipolar world, they want a multipolar world, multilateral system. And what has happened, I think, within the war in Ukraine is Russia has shown that the sanctions thing can be beaten. And a lot of the countries of Africa and Latin America are all as you said, the other Latin America now, it's only a few countries are not leftish, are all moving into a position of thinking that they can be able to defy this domination and control and become self-determined countries, which they have done a lot over the last few years. Things have been changing in a lot of the countries that were what you might call third world are becoming much more advanced. So we're in that ball game of how that will pan out, and it's getting to a critical state, isn't it? You know, who's going to fall with the seemingly countries are forming up to join BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa initiative, and looking towards a different currency and to the dollar, or trading in their own currencies, which is going to have a massive effect on America, because I mean it only survives by its military power and the money it makes from its military, and the dominance of the dollar. If it weren't for being a world currency, the United States would have to apply to the IMF for funds, because it's a debtor country. I see that, for me, is the most crucial thing. What's going to happen? And I think the United States have been quite clever, because they are fairly self-sufficient, and they've destroyed, or they're attempting to destroy, the European industry. And so they've, in their anti-inflation legislation, they have been given inducements for firms to relocate in United States, because they can see that part of the balance sheet, the industry part, has gone in America, and they know that they've got to try and build it up as well. And so seemingly quite a few industries are looking at taking this offer up, particularly perhaps Germany and that have lost an enormous amount of money. Their industries are crumbling because they can't afford the gas prices, and the guesswork is that this winter won't be the worst one. The winter of 1923 is going to be even worse. The prices are skyrocketing and they can't survive. This was happening before the Ukraine war, if you remember. Countries relocating, and that will get worse. And so America can survive itself, but I think it's Europe and that's going to suffer from it. And so you know, that's I see it, and you know, the threat of a nuclear war is fucking it looms up, doesn't it? Because you've got all these clowns in the leadership of the Democratic Party who, you know, are just neoliberal ideologues that just push, and there's no turning back, you know. Which is why we haven't had a settlement in the Ukraine situation. Anyway, that's my opening remarks. I was a bit long there.
No, it's all right, Roy. No problem. I thought it might be useful just to show a graph or a couple of graphs about this is really talking about because there's two aspects of this discussion, isn't there? What's actually happening inside America and how America relates to the rest of the world. Kind of, they are linked, obviously, but they're two different aspects of this thing. Just thought I'd show you a couple of economic charts, which are projections for. Hold on, let me bring this up. Which are projections of the world. If growth carries on approximately as it has been over the last sort of 15 years or 10 years, let's say. The projections for GDP in 2030. So let me share this if I can. Hold on a second. Here we are. Okay. So can you guys see this? Can you guys see this chart? Yeah.
Yeah.
So these are like IMF projections, actually. I think. Or let's double check. I know they were from Martin Jakes' book, but I think they're IMF projections. So you can see, as we know, economics. As Marxists, we know economics is a fundamental factor, in determining not every detail of society, but the long-term trend of society. So if you're talking about here that the developing world's share of production gets to this level, like 2/3 to 1/3, you can understand how that will have a big impact on the power of no matter what they try to do, on the power of America and the West. Let me open a little bit more detailed picture. Hold on a second. Of this chart. Let me show you a more detailed breakdown of this. Here we go. Now, hopefully you can see this chart. Can you see this chart? Yeah. Okay. And so here you see a breakdown of how that breaks down by countries. And from there you can see you've got China will have more than twice the US, the way things are going in terms of this is a share of production. India, Russia, Brazil, other Asian countries. So overwhelmingly, we're going to see. Now these figures might be slightly different for how they turn out. We don't know exactly, But this is the general trend that Asia in particular will be the Eurasia, if you include Russia, will be the dominant economic force on the planet. And that's got to, ultimately, that's got to affect how powerful the Europe and North America are going to be in the future. And of course, this is a process that will take time to work out, but it's happening as we're looking now. And I think, as Roy mentioned about the failure of the sanctions against Russia, is quite a decisive step in this process. And there is I have another chart where, which it's a world map, which shows you how many countries are applying sanctions and how many are not. And the overwhelming majority of countries are not applying sanctions against Russia, which just further proves the point about the shifting balance of power. So once the effect of sanctions declines, and this BRICS that Roy talks about, I think there's 12 countries now have applied to join the BRICS, and they're now discussing, the BRICS members are now discussing, it's a slow process, bureaucratic process, discussing how the criteria on which to admit them into the BRICS. So this BRICS, if that happens, the BRICS will be much more powerful than the G7, for example, or even, certainly, more powerful by far, and almost twice as big economically as the G7. And that will mean that when the West tries to apply sanctions on countries in the future, they won't have the same impact, because the BRICS will be, the people who will be in the BRICS will be able to trade with the BRICS countries. And that will become even more the case if a basket of currencies is developed by the BRICS based on their membership. And apparently they'll also be on the basis of them linking to the commodities that the BRICS countries produce, which will give the currency a lot more solidity. That's one of the reasons. One of the reasons why the currency in Russia has actually got stronger since the sanctions, is because people have realized that Russia has got all these commodities back in their currency, and the realization's come to the fore. So, okay, so I just thought I'd give a little bit of extra information.
Pat,
all right, so who would like to speak next?
Pat,
yeah?
Can I just backing up what you were saying about BRICS? Because I said, because that's what it stands for: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Then, looking at the other countries that might or are applying to join, I just read what it says. Because I only looked this up today to check it out. That concerning the BRICS expansion, Lavrov stated that Algeria, Argentina, and Iran had all applied, while it is already known that Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, and Afghanistan are interested, along with Indonesia.
And Nigeria as well.
Other likely contenders for membership include Kazakhstan, Nicaragua, Nigeria, Senegal, Thailand, and the United Arab Emirates. And they all sent their finance ministers to the BRICS expansion dialogue meeting. So it's a massive increase in numbers that potentially that could be. That's very quickly that's happening. And I think, the war is a spark that's igniting it all.
Okay, so right, who else would like to come in and say either about the the geopolitical side or about the internal affairs of America, whichever you feel you want to talk about?
Well, if I
go ahead, Samos. Yeah,
say a few things. First of all, I shall go back to the internal situation in America. It seems to me that the main actors on behalf of the big monopolies are the Democrats. I mean, they are the ones who are trying to manage the situation in America, and they are the ones who are losing. And it seems to me also that the Republicans, they are moving more and more to the extreme right, and they are gaining all the frustrated capitalists and even the frustrated workers in America, and that's how they are gaining ground in all these years. And I suspect, although I have nothing very specific about it, because I couldn't find any information on that, is that the main reason that they failed to take over the Senate, and they failed to make all these predicted gains in America, seems to be that it's going to be the war in Ukraine. I mean, we are witnessing a sort of support due to the war that they are waging against Russia and Ukraine. And it seems to me that we should not underestimate this factor. And the whole world, going from there, it seems to me that the whole world is moving into a nightmarish Orwellian situation where we have a continuous war between the superpowers, and and we are not going to see the sort of economic development that is predicted by the IMF or by anybody, because nothing is stable anymore. I mean, we are before Ukraine, Europe was presenting itself as a sort of fairly stable, viable project, and it just collapsed in the face of this war. I mean, they put themselves under the leadership of America again, and the Americans are running the show. And I don't know what's going to happen to China. I mean, the main Pat is correct in identifying China as the main concern of the Americans because of their rising economic power. As far as the charts that we have seen, I think we need to understand what exactly lies behind those charts. I mean, the production might be going away from Japan, Europe, and America, and we have in many other countries this rise. But what is behind this production? Is it Chinese ownership, or is it American ownership? Is it multinationals? And how? And what is the importance of countries versus the importance of companies in this situation? And this interlinking, we have to see what is going on. I'm not sure about it. My suspicion is that we have reached a stage where the big companies, the big monopolies are running the show. Countries are to a greater or lesser extent sort of instruments of these monopolies, economically speaking. The Russians are, I mean, Putin is obviously working for the big Russian monopolies, and he's trying to serve the interests of the oligarchs. Biden and the Democrats are trying to serve the interest of the big monopolies of the West, and the situation is becoming more and more a matter of political rather than economic issue. The big monopolies are there, and they are there to stay. What the politics of the various countries is a different matter, and I think it's we are going to live in the next years in the shadow of war, of one sort or another. A war that is going to be more or less a permanent presence, if not outright permanent presence, it will throw its shadow over anything that happens in the world. Now, as far as China is concerned, I mean, we have seen how the West is jumping into celebrating these demonstrations in China. But again, it shows that in China, if the Communist Party collapses, we are not going to see a socialist democratization of society. We're going to see a move towards capitalism, and it's this sort of analysis that we haven't seen coming out in any coherent terms, and probably we are living in an era that world revolution is again on the cards, and it's we have to see anything that happens in the world in this light. Now, what I haven't anything to offer more than this, but I would be very reluctant to follow the normal analysis of routine development of the economics of any country, but probability of very sudden political changes that is going to be the reality of the present.
Thanks, Amos. Who would like to come in? Khalid, can you hear us, Khalid?
Yeah, I can. Yes.
Did you want to come in and say anything?
Yeah, just briefly.
About America.
Yeah. Just a couple of points on the American elections. One thing is clear, from the results, that the divisions and political polarization that exist in America will intensify in the coming period. And with the likely recession and more deeper crisis in the American economy, I think it will intensify the political struggle and infighting, not only within the Democratic Party, but I think also in the Republican Party. And so it will be, looking at the election results, I think the abortion rights movement somehow saved the day for the Democratic Party. And the exit polls that clearly shows that 31% people were worried about the economy and inflation, but 27% voters they said they are also worried. They are concerned about the abortion rights, and so it becomes like the second most important issue for the a big chunk of the voters. And so the red wave that was a lot of people were talking about, it never happened. And I think one of the main reasons is, and the other reason I think is the young voters. And they overwhelmingly, like 63% young voters age 18 to 24, they voted for Democratic Party. Even it was not a very big in numbers when you calculate the total votes, but yes, it played an important role on a crucial battleground seats in the states. And on the other hand, the Democratic Party is really losing or continue to losing out the young working class voters. And on the the people like Futterman in Georgia and some others who campaign around the working class issues, they have, they won the elections and they have mobilized a big number of young voters, and especially young working class voters in their favor. So the problem, I think, increasingly the right wing, the corporate democratic wing of the Democratic Party, they are not interested, at this stage, to incorporate the concerns and the issues of the working class people in America. And I think that is one of the reasons, they are in the 2024 elections. I think these issues will come up again, and the Republicans are still getting like 42% voters in America are working class voters. And if the Democratic Party is not interested to campaign around on their issues, it means either they will not come out to vote, or many of them might go to the Republican Party, like they did in 2016. So that is, I think, the the other thing, I think, the as far as where America is going and the perspective, I think the economic crisis and a likely recession will definitely increase the the political instability and the infighting. And America, it was the Gallup survey's latest figures. It gives like it's amazing that more than 87% people have said that the America is not going in the right direction. And I think it's the largest in any country where the majority of the population have lost trust on the ruling class. And I think that is it's going to increase. And increasingly, the people are now openly saying that this system is not working for them. And I think, and also I think the encouraging sign is the development of the new trade union movements and McDonald's and the other places, and the young workers started to organize. I think it's a good development as far as the working class movement is concerned. So I think, and if we in relation to China geopolitical thing, I think the Pentagon's latest report regarding China's increasing military power, I think that shows how things are going to unfold in the near future, and the struggle is going to intensify between the US and China. And also linked with this is the I think the what happened with the Russia-Ukraine war, I think is going to determine a lot of things, and how this is going to settle, and how this war is going to shape up in the coming months. And so a lot depends on that. And so it will be interesting to see, from here up to the leading up to the next American elections, presidential election 2024. So thanks, Comrade.
Thanks, Khalid. Great. Another comrade like to come in? Mike, you want to come in?
I was more concerned about our intervention for what all the comrades have said. I was wondering whether if we can spend a bit of time, because I think we all agree that capitalism in the United States is in a deep crisis, and it's quite unlikely for it to actually resolve these crises that it faces, because it's an international capitalist crisis that the world is faced with. And I would like us to, for our own purposes, how do we deal? What would be our intervention?
So Mike, do you want to? Shall we? Why don't we take that at towards the end of the meeting?
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
those comrades who want to talk about the analysis, because I think that there possibly are some differences about how people see this and what perspectives they have. And then that makes sense that we could go on to talk about towards the end about how we respond to this situation, this analysis. Mike, if you wanted to say anything about how you see what's happening in America, go ahead.
Well, sitting in South America here, and the influence of the State Department on our administration here is huge. And question is, as you say, we'll discuss it later on, what would be because each of us living in a different part of the world, we are playing our individual roles in whatever movement whatever country we are in. But we here in South America, and now with the victory of the left in Brazil, an interesting development for us in the Caribbean, in Latin America, and South America in general. And all of these things are linked up. And so I think that I will leave it at that, because when we come to discuss I've got some ideas about what do we do, how could we influence and be a part of the process.
Sure. Okay, man. Good. So we'll definitely come back to you on that. How about Stefan? Are you available, Stefan, to be able to say anything at the moment? You're muted, so I don't know if you can.
No, I'm unmuted.
Ah, brilliant. Okay,
Well,
Stefan.
I rather not say anything.
Oh, okay.
I prefer
All
to listen.
No problem. Yeah. How about you, Yen? Did you want to say anything about what's happening in America and how you see it going there?
I don't have anything much to add here. Well, I didn't understand. Is it the comrade when he talked about China collapse or something? Or did I get it wrong? Something on China, if there's a capitalist restoration, I wasn't getting what he meant to say.
Well, don't worry about that, yeah, because we're going to have our next session, I think, is actually on China, isn't it? So we're going to go into that in some detail and talking about perspectives for China and analyzing China. So I don't think we have to go into too much now. Sajjad from Pakistan, did you want to say anything about the situation?
No comment. I like to listen.
Okay. All right. Well, I just wanted to say something about the elections myself. Okay. One of the strange contradictions of politics in America is that all the surveys done of the population show that there's a big majority for a progressive agenda. If you analyze, for example, it's like 70+% for a free healthcare system. It's
You're frozen, Pat, on my screen anyway.
Yeah,
sorry, what was that? Sorry?
You froze on my screen. I don't know if everybody else had it.
on my screen as well, you're frozen.
You froze for about
Can you-
6 seconds.
Can you still hear what I'm saying or not? No?
Yeah, I can hear you now, yeah.
Okay, all right, yeah, sorry, I don't know. Yeah, so what I was saying was that the overwhelming majority of the public in America, the population, supports a progressive agenda on demands for healthcare, minimum wage, etc., infrastructure, all sorts of different aspects. When they do opinion polls, they find an overwhelming majority are behind the left policies. Not only that, when they've done these, this latest midterm elections, there are also states are allowed to have referendums on policies. And on each of the referendums, the left won those referendums. So, for example, at the same time as they voted for right-wing Republican leadership in Florida, they were voting for the minimum wage, and same in what are regarded as these Republican red states in the west of America. They're voting by good majorities for left-wing policies and referendums. So how is it possible, if that's the case, that we can see politics moving to the right? The Republicans, although the Republicans didn't get the big wave they were hoping for, they did get, there was a swing to the Republicans, and through that they won the House of Representatives. And the reason, I think a very simple reason, is because the Democrats are controlled by the big money and the corporates, companies, and they are not allowing their left-wing policies to be put forward by the Democrats in the Congress, in the Senate, in the election campaigns. I mean, it even got so bad that they just passed a couple of months ago, they passed a constitutional change so that the National Committee of the Democrats is no longer constitutionally under the control of the convention. So that they basically, if the convention decides a radical policy, then the National Committee of Democrats haven't had to support it. And when you don't, and so, for example, someone gave the example. I was listening to an interesting discussion about this last week. Someone gave the example that the way for the Democrats to have won this election, and the next one too, would be to put up bills in the Congress and the Senate pushing these policies. Free healthcare, high minimum wage, action on the housing crisis, and so on and so on. But the leadership of the Democrats will not allow that to happen. Now, of course, if they did do it, then the Republicans would vote against those progressive measures, and everyone would see that the Republicans were anti-working class and etc. But in the absence of that happening, which the Democratic leadership do not want to happen, you then get into a situation where that whole debate revolves around these, what they call the culture war, the cultural issues of abortion, religious questions, schooling, you name it, racial identity, gender identity, and these kind of trans questions. So of course, on those kind of issues, that cuts across class differences often. And thus you had a situation where the population could be very evenly divided, and an issue like abortion could swing a lot of votes. So in that context, the American decision by the right wing on the Supreme Court to make a ruling against abortion was able to deliver a fair amount of votes that probably stopped the red wave happening. And so you get this very artificial division between the parties in America, rather than being over the class issues, and that's the fundamental underlying problem in these elections. Now, there was an economic factor as well, that although people are suffering, their living standards are falling rapidly in America, the one good side of the economy has been the fact that they've had very low unemployment, and although, so in other words, you can leave a job and get another job very quickly in America at the moment. And although the wages will be crap, that does make a big difference in people's psychology, because so then they tend to think if they can't get enough income, it's not because of some failing in the system as a whole. A lot of people have start to say, well, maybe I'm not working hard enough. Maybe I've got to take another job or 2 jobs or whatever. So then they can easily be conned by all this stuff about, well, you're failing because of your lack of discipline, or your whatever it might be. You haven't got a good enough education. So now the reason why the unemployment is low is because the big recession that America is now starting to go into, what tends to happen in these situations is that unemployment is the last of the indicators to be affected. So we're now starting to see a lot of layoffs start to happen. And if the big recession does come through in the next year, 18 months, by the time of the next election, we're going to see mass unemployment. So not only will you have the massive continuing reduction in wages, which is incidentally causing a revival of the trade union movement in America and a revival of strikes, you're going to see mass unemployment as well. So therefore, it could be that in 2 years' time, that the Republicans will have that red wave. And it depends on what they do on these cultural issues, of course. But they could have that red wave, and we could see the Republicans get a bigger majority in the House of Representatives, take the Senate, and even win the presidency. So that then brings us on to the question of Trump, of course. Trump has suffered in this recent election because quite a number of the candidates he backed didn't get elected. And so there seems to be a bit of a swing away from Trump. We don't know how that will work out in practice. But if it does happen that DeSantis, who seems to be the main candidate who could defeat Trump in the Republican Party, if he comes to power, he will actually probably be a far more dangerous force because he's more efficient and more more effective than Trump, who's all over the place, as we saw, and very lazy. Trump was very lazy. He was, he was not following the agenda much. He was he was allowing different factions to jockey for position and things. He didn't have an agenda, really a clear agenda that he was following. Whereas DeSantis would follow a much more clear agenda, and DeSantis is part of the neoconservative, neoliberal establishment. So we could see a much worse situation if DeSantis was to become the presidency. Now, the other strange side of this consequence of this election was that it seemed to reinforce Biden. People say, oh, Biden didn't do so badly in these elections, because normally in the midterms, it swings against the government more decisively. And so it could be that Biden will be the candidate for the Republicans. We don't know, but it's kind of shored up the potential candidacy. But I can't see that Biden would win the next presidency. I find the presidential election, I find that hard to believe, but we don't know exactly. Now, the last thing I wanted to come on was talking about America. I wanted to show a chart, another chart. I just did a little bit of research before this about the military-industrial complex in America, because this has a big impact on, obviously, on. Now, if I can find it, let's see if I can find this chart. Hold on a second. Find these things, isn't it? Let's have a look now. Oh, here we are. So this is it. Okay, here we are. Let me now share this with you. Okay, so now this is a very interesting chart. Because I've been doing a lot of research about China and the Chinese army and so on. And what this chart shows you, it's a little bit confusing the way they do the chart, but what it's actually showing you is that this huge big blue circle is the US arms companies. Okay, the much smaller red one is the Chinese one. This one here is the British one. This one is the Russian. This one's the Russian one. This one here is France, I think. Oh no, so that's France, and this is the rest. Now, the reason why this is interesting is that America, as we know, has been deindustrialized in the last period. As we talked about in a previous session, the spread of neoliberalism around the world in this latest version of globalization, which has also gone with it, has been this trying to develop a level playing field across the world so that foreign capital from America and Europe and Japan and so on could go into any country it wanted to and have laws and regulations that suited it. It's meant a big export of capital from the advanced countries to the developing world, and a big shift in industrial production. Nowhere is this more the case than China, but it's also been happening in Mexico, Turkey, Indonesia, Malaysia, Brazil, many countries. And So as a result, the share of world production and world trade by America in the world is drastically reduced, with one exception, and that is arms production. And here you can see that in this chart, that the American arms companies, arms production, is as big as almost the rest of the world put together, and completely disproportionate to the rest of the American manufacturing economy. And that this is a graphical evidence of what we're seeing in America, which is that the military industrial complex, or to be more precise, the military industrial congressional complex. That was, by the way, this was a term that was spoken by President Eisenhower in his last address to the American population in, this would be 1960, I think it would be, or beginning of 1961, where he warned America about this developing, and he called it a military industrial congressional complex. But what they did was, that was the first version of his speech, and there was a lot of reaction against that among his advisors. So he took out the congressional part and just left it military industrial complex. But the reason why he had congressional in there is because basically the military leadership and the industrial companies that are producing arms had effectively taken over the Congress through bribery. The typical Congress person has to be sweet with the military and the arms industry, because a lot of their not only their funds for re-election come from that, but also the location of bases, military factories in their location is absolutely crucial if they want to get re-elected. And so since that time, and Eisenhower, who'd come from the military background himself, remember he was the leader of the Allied forces in the Second World War, so he knew what he was talking about, and he realized that what was basically happening was that this kind of setup between the military, the arms industry, and the politicians was meaning that America's foreign policy was not being forged on the basis of what was in the long-term interest of America, but what was in the interest of these groups. And they were bribing all the politicians to do things. So of course, it was in their interest to have continual war. And so, of course, they pushed for Vietnam, they pushed for all the other wars. The big problem with that is that it screwed up, so Vietnam alone screwed up America's finances and led to America one of the main factors why America went into a terrible crisis in the early 70s and had to come off the gold standard, because they were spending trillions on the Vietnam War, and they couldn't afford it. And the same has happened with all these other wars. And so once and we see this, don't we? So once the Soviet Union collapsed, so the Cold War came to an end, there was all this talk at the time of a massive peace dividend, that that America wouldn't need to spend all this money on huge nuclear arms, on submarines, on military bases, etc., and they could then use that money for peaceful purposes like research and development, industrial development, social services, and so on. And that frightened the military-industrial complex in America. So they started casting around, well, who could be our enemy next? And basically, they want to be in a situation like a permanent war economy. And so, of course, the attack on 9/11 played directly into their hands. So then they launched this war against terrorism, and that led to all these. They used that as an excuse for all these wars in Iraq and Libya and Syria and Afghanistan and so on. But now, of course, they're always on the lookout for enemies to justify this expenditure. So, of course, now they've got this one with, first of all, with Russia, and now they've got this one with China. So that you get a situation where, although these things are actually to the long-term disadvantage Because if you think about it, if you're diverting a major part of your national income into arms and armies and so on, which don't produce anything and don't actually benefit you, they have some sort of side effects in terms of development of some technology and so on, but overall, they're a complete waste of money. And they reduce the amount of money available for investment and development of your economy. So in the long term, it's definitely in the long-term disadvantage of America to be doing this. But nevertheless, all the forces that are involved in these sectors in America have a self-interest in doing it. And that brings me on to one last bit about that, is that because of this corrupt arrangement, they don't even get value for money. So for example, China is spending a third of what America is spending on defense, but is getting dramatically more benefits from this because the Chinese arms companies are state-owned, as are, by the way, most of this arms production in Russia is state-owned. Whereas these private companies are fleecing the American taxpayers and charging dramatically over the odds for these weapons and for all the bases and all the rest of it. So of course, they're not even getting value for money for their investment in the military, whereas China and Russia are doing so. And of course, China is actually, if this carries on, if the process carries on that we're seeing, China will have a much stronger military in the next 10 years than America does. And already in certain key sectors of the military, they are already stronger than the Americans. So I just wanted to say something about this whole military industrial, and the end result of this, of course, is not only is America wasting all this money on arms, but the whole political system of America has become totally corrupted by this process. So that all the senators and the congressmen are all bought and paid for by the big corporations, and to a much greater degree than even the other capitalist countries in Europe, etc. And so, of course, this has all sorts of other negative effects on American society, and mean that effectively America, whatever America does to try to overcome its economic programs, policies and problems, they end up with adopting laws that are totally corrupt. And so, for example, the latest, they managed to carry some of Biden's agenda. But when you actually look at the laws, the neoliberals got in there through the Congress process, and they completely gutted those laws in a corrupt way, so that we won't actually lead to dramatic improvement in the infrastructure in America. And it will actually lead to further privatization and toll roads and toll bridges and all the rest of it. So you can see how all these things all tie together. And that the outcome of all that, of course, is it means that not only is American foreign policy totally distorted, but it means that American domestic policy is totally distorted, and it's extremely difficult for them to get out of the problem they're in. And that's how I see it. Okay. All right. Who would like to say anything more on American perspectives? Roy, go ahead.
Well, Pat, these are very interesting charts about the arms industry, and I wonder whether you could share it with us so that we
definitely, yeah. I will. I'll put it up in our forum. All right. Yeah.
Okay, fine. That's fine.
Yeah,
that's
sure.
fine. Then what did you find on this?
Well, I'm doing a lot of research. I'm working on a book to be published in the new year on China. So I wanted to compare, Chinese arms production with American, and so I did a lot of research, and this stuff comes up. Yeah. And I wanted to understand, why is it that Chinese are spending a third of what America is, but they're actually, so for example, China is launching 3 naval vessels for every American naval vessel at the moment. That's just one example. It's like that in almost all the technological fields. And I thought, well, how is it possible China's able to do that? And then I looked into this, and then And also, I wanted to know, why is it that the military-industrial complex in America is, so dominant? And I tried to find some statistics on that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Roy, you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, it says that the sales based on the arms companies based on sales. So that graph doesn't distinguish between what the American government purchases or what they sell overseas, because don't forget all these countries are selling arms overseas as well.
Right.
So it doesn't give an indication of that graph. It might be a good idea to find something like that. And the other thing about this, as again Hudson Park points out, that it's to sustain the armaments expenditures sustained only by the money that comes back into the United States of the West buying bonds, American bonds. And so if as we expect to happen, the move against the dollar and the bank's not investing in American bonds, that income will be gone or would go down, and they wouldn't have the free lunch, as Michael Hudson puts it, of being able to spend all that money on their arms. The other thing I was going to ask is, say, in that anti-inflation bill that the Democrats put through, I think it was an extension of a couple of bills that have been trying to push through, that Biden tried to push through, on his plans for rejuvenating the economy. All the new infrastructure that's falling apart in America, the bridges falling down, the roads, there's got hardly any railroad, all the other infrastructure, and also new investment things on solar energy and all sorts of things like that he had in that bill. And initially the Republicans opposed it, and for ideological reasons, that the state shouldn't be investing in stuff. It should be private enterprises investing in stuff. And it took him, and they knocked it, they halved it. I know it was several £1 trillion that it was originally, and they knocked it down to £1 or £2 trillion, whatever it ended up in the end. They knocked quite a lot of it out. So there is this kind of you see, you tend to look at them as the same people, the same policies and that, but they ain't the same policies. They've just got this. The Democrats have just got this fanaticism about war and all the rest of it, and it just made me wonder because what you say about the people, what they want in the country, and compared with what the parties are offering, but applies everywhere. Applies in Britain. Everybody, everyone socialism in Britain, but they didn't get it because the parties don't abide by what they're up, particularly in America, because they have to get all their funding for their campaigns from the donors. It doesn't happen so much in Britain, but it's just the outcomes are bloody same. They don't get the policies that the people want. And I wonder if you had any view about the potential for either a new party, which people were talking about in Britain, or whether the Democratic Party, I think I've heard you say in the past that it's different. You can't go through the Democratic Party, but I wonder if that, Saunders was unlucky, as was Jeff, what's the name in Britain, unlucky, Corbyn. But I mean, it's how will that, what will be the manifestation of all the problems that the working class in America have? Because let's not forget, they have to pay for their education and their healthcare and all that. they're in a difficult situation more than many other places. I mean, and this makes you think about what a program should be, political programs. In Latin America, they've come up with quite radical programs and get elected, because they've gone through a massive experience of what happens when you get Western interference and dictatorships, etc., etc., etc. They've suffered, they've learned through bitter struggle, that you can't, you've got to put something more radical forward, and this idea, that socialism will come through the most advanced capitalist countries doesn't seem to be working. It seems to be the other way around. Although I suppose you could say that Russia is an advanced capitalist country, that China is, that some of the these other what were advanced countries are now modern capitalist countries to the extent to which the US allows them to be, put it that way. So I just wonder if any thoughts about that.
Yeah, any comrades want to come in on the, it's one thing to obviously analyze what's going on in America, but then what's the way forward there, for the left, for the movement, Any comrades like to come in and say something about that? I mean, one controversy that Roy talked about is whether or not you should work try to work through the Democratic Party, or try to build a third party.
But you and I were discussing the health situation. Obviously, you can see what has happened in China and how the Western world responded to the lockdown and so on. But I don't know the figure of how much the United States is spending on drugs, medicine, and so on. But it has to be a huge amount that they're spending, which is equal to probably more than what they're spending on the military. And the question is, which I think we need to discuss, you and I were going to discuss it in the context of China, and whether their health policies that they're pursuing is in the best interest of the ordinary people in China. But that's another discussion. But I just wanted to bring it into the discussion about the amount of money that is spent on drugs and medicine, this huge scandal on this vaccine, which is not a vaccine, and how they've been able to misuse the press and media to ram this down people's throat about taking the vaccine, and even restricting people in some parts of the world, like in Guyana. You couldn't go into the banks and you could not do any business in any public places. So people, it's like a dictatorship. And these are things that we need to discuss. I mean, how do we respond to these types of propaganda? And for me, it is totally false. This whole concept of vaccine and medicine and drugs that they pump into people. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's something that the left is very guilty of. Because I heard Richard Wolff going on and on about the vaccine, how people mistake. There's no difference between Richard Wolff's understanding of health than those in the Democratic Party. In fact, people may laugh at Trump, but he had a better view of what is happening. Obviously, he didn't have he opportunistically rode on him not to have the vaccine or spend money on vaccines and so on. But so he rode on the backs of a lot of progressive experts on health, which obviously Cormancia would not have known because they're not really involved in the health industry and like us. But that is something that needs to be tackled, not only in the United States, but in the United Kingdom, the whole Western world, and in large parts of of the third, what we call the third world. And if you look at the statistics, how many people died in the third world from this COVID-19, the large proportion of them, I don't have the figures here, the large proportion of them didn't have the vaccine, they didn't take the vaccine, and they didn't suffer the fatalities that people who took the vaccine suffered. So it's a huge scandal. It's in fact one of the most corrupt areas of life in the United States and the Western world. And I think when we discuss this, we'll probably bring it to the fore about an alternative health policy that can actually save the world. That's where we're heading.
On that, Mike, the figure you were searching for, I think it's nearly, well, the figure they give is about 18%, or nearly 20% of the American economy is taken up with health expenditure. And the health companies, both health insurance and health and drug companies, again, they corrupt the Congress and they prevent this, like a national health service being introduced, which is supported by not just a majority of Democrats, but a sizable majority of Republicans. I mean, that's the farce of it, and this just, the American, that's the funny thing. America funds all these anti-corruption agencies around the world and NGOs, and yet the American political system, without any doubt, is the most corrupt in the world. I mean, it's so bad that as soon as you get elected to the Congress, you have to start raising money from the very day you arrive. And in fact, when right now, they're getting ready for a new House of Representatives, and typically members of Congress will give each other large sums of money. So we're talking about $1 million, $2 million just for their vote to go on a particular subcommittee of the House of Representatives or the Senate. And the reason is because once you get on those committees, then you get all the bribes from the big corporations. I mean, the thing is absolutely appalling. And this is not unknown in America. Everybody knows that. I mean, most Americans, when they do surveys about this, they think it's disgusting. I mean, an example of this was the bill that has just been effectively put into the long grass, which was raised by some of the left in the Democratic Party against Congress members being able to buy and sell shares. And what they're doing in the Congress is that the Congress members, they buy and sell shares based on the inside information they get on these subcommittees. And that's how, for example, Nancy Pelosi and her husband have gone from being, normal upper middle class people to being having like hundreds of millions of dollars in their bank accounts. And it's the same, and it applies to both the Republicans and the Democrats equally. So that when they came to when the left pushed this policy that would ban all buying and selling of shares, because inevitably Congress members get all sorts of inside information, don't they? I mean, they've got all these companies coming to give answer their questions and so on inside committees, and so obviously if you allow the MPs to be able to buy and sell shares, the members of Parliament, members of the House of Congress, then you're going to get corruption on a massive scale. So when they put this forward, there was potentially a majority in the Democratic Congress to carry this, but Nancy Pelosi and the powers of didn't allow it to go to the floor of the Congress. And when they've done opinion polls on this particular legislation, 90% of the American public supported it, but it couldn't even get heard, never mind debated, never mind voted on. And this is the kind of situation we're facing in the American political system. It's just so absolutely thoroughly corrupt from top to bottom, unfortunately, and getting worse all the time. I saw the amount of money spent in the current congressional elections, these midterms that have just finished, was nearly $1 billion. Was it nearly $1 billion? 900 and something million was spent, which was by far the greatest amount that had ever been spent in a midterm election. That was that was typically the money spent in the elections for the Congress and the presidency combined. And by the way, the Republicans got huge amounts of money from the neoliberal organizations in this election, far bigger than. So whereas normally you might have spent, say, a couple of $100,000 in a congressional race, you'd have millions spent in the latest congressional race. So it's a kind of an arms race of money being spent, which just further corrupts the system. So there doesn't, as far as I can see, there doesn't seem to be any way forward on that. On the question of the Democrats, whether you can reform the Democratic Party or not, I think we're seeing evidence that this is an extremely difficult thing to do. But it might be tactically that if you want to build a third party, you have to do it out of mounting a campaign within the Democrats, because you get all the publicity and everything. And then once that seemed to fail, you then lay the basis in terms of, your fame for your candidates and the huge number of supporters you've got and the money you can raise. You might then be able to use that as the basis to build a third party. The problem is that the electoral system in America and in Britain, which is the similar system, first past the post system, where basically, unlike the proportional representation system, it's a very strong bias against having third parties, isn't it? So, and so it's extremely difficult. So America, in a way, is locked into politically into a system whereby it's very hard to break out of this duopoly of politics. And on top of that, of course, the Republicans have basically taken a behind-the-scenes decision to undermine democracy throughout America, and it's steadily, these last elections didn't help them in that regard, but steadily they are taking over more and more of the states and getting laws changed to change the districting of elections, so it's very difficult to win those, so they'll corral all the Democratic voters into one constituency and make it so that it's much easier to win for the Republicans to win more. Plus, they're making it so that a lot of working class voters and black voters and so on are excluded from the poll. They're doing all sorts of maneuvers step by step, and they're getting it to a stage as well whereby even when they lose elections, the Republicans, they can actually declare them at state level to be null and void those elections and have the state legislatures to declare for who they want to be the candidate. And that can even apply to the presidency. So in 2024, there's a possibility that the Democrats could win, as has happened on a number of occasions, they could win the popular vote, but the Republicans could declare through the electoral college system in the states, they could declare a candidate, their candidate to win. So we don't know what's going to happen about that. But there's slowly but surely, with the Republicans now ideologically against democracy because of the control of the neoliberals of the Republicans, in the long run, there's a big possibility that American democracy we will go into an authoritarian state, so that somewhat like you have in Hungary, for example, where although they are elected, they're controlled by the government of all the media and a lot of other processes, means that in practice, you can end up with a government which is effectively a dictatorship. That could well happen. And we're starting to see the media in America, by the way, going more and more to the right. Even CNN has now coming off its heavily pro-democratic position under pressure, and now trying to take a kind of balanced position between the Democrats and the Republicans. And we're likely to see that process unfold even more, so that the Republicans are gaining more and more control of the media in America. And we see this even in the Twitter battle at the moment, that the Democrats are going berserk because they've lost control of Twitter, haven't they, effectively? So These are all very worrying developments for the future. I mean, if America does go down that road more and more, then it will be extremely difficult for them to stand up in the world and say, "Oh, this is a battle between democracies versus autocracies." If more and more America is controlled by autocracy, you know, so that will have a lot of impact even on the geopolitical battles that's going on. So, any other comrades who would like to come in? Comrades who perhaps didn't say anything earlier, anything's been said that they disagree with, or sparked off them thinking about other aspects. I know Stefan didn't say anything earlier on, and Sajjad, did you, either of you two comrades want to come in and say something?
Short answer is no.
Oh, okay. I mean, Stefan, what do you feel about what the comrades have been saying in this discussion? Do you generally agree with it, or?
Well, it's it's understand clearly that all of your, most of you has read and studied big movements in the world politics better than I, so I'm a bit below and after you in the knowledge, but well, it sounds.
What about the other, Stefan? What about the other Swedish comrades? Because you had your AGM quite recently. Did you have any? Did the question of America and perspective of America come up at all?
No, we it's a long time since we had the discussion or group meeting around international affairs.
Sure.
So it's more like our own Swedish affairs. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we are recording these sessions, and we're putting them up on our Facebook group. So hopefully some of the Swedish comrades will, if they're interested, they can follow. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody, any comrade, Khalid, want to say anything? You want to add anything, Khalid? Yeah, just one thing that now I think about it, Themos raised this question about, you know, economic growth perspectives, and obviously he's right that you know, when you do projections, they're always based on events that have happened in the past, and things are always changing, as we know, especially in the chaotic capitalist world. And on top of that, as Themos made the point that overshadowing a lot of things are, you know, these geopolitical conflicts, and there's no question about that. But having said that, I think that we're talking about China, and we're going to talk about China in much more detail, but within this context, obviously China is being held back by this temporary crisis about COVID. And China is not being, I don't think China's got any real answer about how to move forward on this current situation, but they don't want to take the attitude of giving up on COVID, which has been the position taken by the West now. So basically, there's, you know, most people now stop taking vaccines, and they're not wearing masks, and there's no lockdowns in the West, and basically people are just allowing the disease to develop. And as a result, we're still seeing continuation of deaths and large number of cases. We're seeing a large amount of long COVID cases, which is a much more serious problem than we realized before. And China doesn't want that to happen, because it could lead to millions of old people dying, and you know, millions of younger people having long COVID. So they don't want to do that. So they're in a very difficult position about how to deal with this, particularly now that we have this incredibly infectious version of COVID spread around the world. But eventually this will come to an end. Apparently by the middle of next year, the COVID policy of China will change. And so China's economic growth will resume. Now, I don't think it's going to be the same level we had saw, some years back, of like double-digit figures. But if you break down China's sectors and how its 5-year plans are working out, and its investment and all the infrastructure that around that investment that buttresses it, I have no doubt that China's growth will be considerable. Not least because also the Belt and Road Initiative, contrary to what a lot of people are understanding of, is actually having a huge success for China in raising trade. With the countries who are participating in the Belt and Road projects, the growth in trade between them and China is going up very, very fast. And so China is basically from that is benefiting from what growth there is, what limited growth there is in the developing world. Of course, it's affected by the world recession. So, so I think China's planning is for about 5% growth once they go past the COVID process. The IMF is predicting 4% growth, and these predictions are based on these are based on actual, not just plucked out of their air, as they tend to be in a lot of the capitalist countries, but they are based on concrete plans that are in place and investments that are being made. And I think the fact that China knows that's why Chinese growth projections have been very accurate over the last 40 years, because they know how much money they're spending on public investment and so on. And they have a much more highly planned economy than obviously the capitalist countries. So they're much more aware of what's actually happening in their economy. So one would expect that China, there's no reason to believe that China focusing on the new technologies and investing in them heavily and so on, that they won't actually have more. We don't know the exact rate, but they will have a faster rate of growth than the West. And of course, on top of that, of course, the West is now going into this capitalist recession. And even adding more to that is that China, for example, only has 2.5% inflation at the moment. And China is making sure, by linking up with Russia in particular, but also getting contracts with all these other countries for fuel, China is tapping into the cheap natural resources of Russia. And so that's why, you mentioned, I don't know who it was, mentioned about these German companies. I think it was Roy, talked about these German companies who are actually increasing their investment in China. China's had a massive increase in foreign investment in the last 9 months, because China's got very low inflation, they've got very cheap energy compared to the West. So the West is not only having a downturn in terms of its economic recession, but it's also got high inflation and high rising energy costs. So we could see that the differential between Chinese economic growth and Western economic growth could even be bigger than we've seen in the last few years. So we will go into this in much more detail. Thank you very much for everybody for your attendance. Great.
Thanks everybody too. Yeah, bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye, comrades. Bye-bye.